discussing where we will be discussing food insecurity in a land of plenty. We are joined today by Marco Grimaldo and Jose Soto Rivera from Bread for the World, who have been on the front lines of food needs, of sustenance globally, including the United States and Puerto Rico. Would like to open and offer a prayer from Ted Loader in his compilation of Guerrillas of Grace, Prayers for the Battle. And he offers this for us today. The supplication, God, go with us in a new exodus. Let us pray. O God of fire and freedom, deliver us from our bondage to what can be counted and go with us into a new exodus towards what counts, but can only be measured. That can only be measured in bread that is shared and swords that become plowshares, in bodies healed and minds liberated, in songs sung and justice done, in laughter in the night and joy in the morning, in love through all seasons and great gladness of heart, in all people coming together and a kingdom coming in glory, in your name being praised and us becoming many alleluias. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray. Indeed, through our work together, we become the answers to the prayers of the people. And so I turn this conversation over now to Reverend Kerwin, who will introduce Marco and Jose. Welcome again, everyone.
Greetings and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us, everyone, for the next installment of the Justice Dialogues. I wanna offer that these conversations, these community meetings are really important because what we seek to do is to bring people who are working and doing the on-the-grounds work of organizing, of advocating, of coming up with solutions that we then could take back into our communities and attempt to implement, because we know a lot of what happens is bigger than what we can do individually. And so we have invited Marco Grimaldo and Jose Soto Rivera to share with us from their experience doing the work in Bread for the World. I'm really particularly interested in this topic, in this area, because food insecurity is something that does not have to happen. These are policy choices that can be changed, and what Bread for the World does is advocate and bring people together for that work. I'm grateful that Marco and Jose are here, and I'm just going to invite them to share. I was looking for their bio. I don't have it handy on me, but Marco, Jose, please introduce yourselves to our community and then begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Kerwin. I'm going to introduce myself first, pass it over to Jose, and then come back to sort of tell you a little bit about what we plan to share with you today. So I'm Marco Grimaldo. I have worked for Bread for the World for a very long time, and really, really pleased to be able to say that to you. It's been almost 27 years since I first started with Bread for the World. I am responsible for our work with National Church Partnerships, thus our relationship with the American Baptist Home Mission Society, but then also with Latino communities around the US. I get to work as part of the organizing and faith engagement team. That means that oftentimes we're thinking together with our denominational partners and local churches about the best way to engage the work of advocacy in ways and try to maybe shape public policy as we go along. Jose, why don't you say a word about you, and I'll get us started on the message.
Thanks so much for sharing, and thank you all for the invitation to be here. I'm Jose Soto, the Northeast Regional Organizer for Bread for the World. What that means is I work with faith leaders and congressional offices from Maryland all the way to Maine. Very excited to be here. Puerto Rican born and bred, so happy to hear some stories about your recent trip to Puerto Rico, and excited you were able to share some time there. It's a beautiful place.
Thanks so much, Jose. So maybe a little bit, I'm going to mix this up together. I thought it would be more distinct sections, but as I'm thinking about it, it might work together. There are 820 million people in the US in the world right now that are in some way or another experiencing food insecurity. Some of them are in very, very dire circumstances that we think of as being famine. Places where peoples are not only not getting enough food for their daily needs, but in some cases it's causing them and their children to suffer and possibly die. So this is a very serious context in which we find ourselves in the United States thinking through, well, how does that impact us? Let me bring it down to the local level. On most well, maybe not as often as I should, but on many Sundays, volunteer to feed people after church. And what I've learned about Bread for the World people and people who really get the work of advocacy is that many of them also do this either on Sunday afternoons or maybe during the week. Maybe they go with a youth group and volunteer at a local food pantry. Somehow or another, they're involved in the work of trying to help people have enough food and improving food security in their communities. For that day, when I get to talk with them, I often respect them, and I say I respect especially what you're doing, because today you became the expert on food insecurity in your neighborhood, in your community, around your church, or in the relationships that you hold broadly. Some of our churches have missionaries abroad or relate to our denominational partnerships that give us relationships all over the world. And that too is a very special opportunity to get to know what's going on there. And Bread for the World benefits when we have members and other leaders that want to align themselves or at least walk alongside us in ways that bring that knowledge and that experience to bear on the efforts to end hunger. Low-income households spend a greater share of their income on food in the United States. Food accounts for about 16.4% of the spending for households making less than $10,000 a year, compared to the US average at about 12.7%. So they're spending a lot more on food as a proportion of their income. A person working full-time at the minimum wage earns at about $14,500 a year. If they're the single breadwinner with that family, they're not going to have enough to be able to provide consistently for proper food and nutrition. Nearly 15% of households, more than 40 million Americans, including 12 million children, right? Altogether, 40 million Americans experience food insecurity, and that includes about 12 million children. That's more than 1 in 5 children who are at risk of experiencing food insecurity. I apologize, Jose, I meant to ask you if you would put up our first slide. And we'll just leave this up for a little bit because it'll give you some of those data points a little bit differently than what I offered, but nonetheless give you a context. We're thinking about things very broadly right now, but Jose is going to take us through some of these data points as they relate to current legislation. So I'm going to leave that up, and I'm going to tell you what Bread for the World tries to do when we think about these really big numbers and what we can do about them. So Bread for the World, we call ourselves a collective Christian voice, a Christian advocacy organization that lobbies Congress to help end hunger in the US and around the world. For us, when we talk about ending hunger in the US, we find that it's not sufficient to describe what needs to be done. We can do it best when we talk about the US in the context of the global context of what's going on around the world. So around the world, there are places where food chain problems that we think are inconvenient or costly at the grocery store really become so much more important to people in other parts of the world where they simply can no longer afford food. Speaking with a missionary that I was aware that I came to know in Kenya, her analysis of the war in Ukraine was that it quadrupled the price of food in her community. The war in Ukraine, because of its impact on energy sales, really meant that the food was going to be more expensive for her and for the people in her community. And this was causing all sorts of struggle and strife. So conflict, right, also an issue. Climate, we're not able to grow everything that we would want to be able to grow in the places that it used to grow. And so many people are experiencing hunger in that regard as well. So BREAD looks at policies that are pending in Congress. This year, and Jose will talk more about it. One of the things that's coming up for reauthorization is the Farm Bill, the agricultural policies that the US holds that impact not only farmers and consumers in the US, but others as well. I'm going to stop right there and let Jose talk a little bit about that work, the Farm Bill, and about some ways in which it impacts communities around the country. Jose, let me turn it over to you for a minute.
Thanks so much, Marco. So I'm going to be a little more academic and talk about the Farm Bill. As some of you might be aware, but it's one of the largest pieces of legislation in terms of funding and budget that gets reapproved through Congress. It gets reapproved every 5 years, and for this next upcoming term, it's going to be approved for $709 billion is some of the estimates. Some of the provisions in the Farm Bill do extend to 10 years for this current Farm Bill that need to be approved in consecutive Farm Bills moving forward. And that total 10-year period is $1.4 trillion. It is a very, very, very large portion of the USDA's funding and a lot of the nutritional aid programs. Here's a snapshot about all the different titles that are inside this Farm Bill. There's 12 different titles that include nutrition, crop insurance, conservation, commodities, trade, horticulture research. Food for Peace is also included in here as well, that does some international food aid. As you all can see, nutrition does cover 83% of the Farm Bill's budget. It's a very large segment, but in that nutrition spending, it includes SNAP, but SNAP doesn't only support beneficiaries. It also supports farmers. It also supports distributors of food. It also supports supermarkets and commodity retailers. So it is really something that, yes, it is a large bill, but it does support the economy in a large way. I've seen something that SNAP dollars, every dollar that gets invested into SNAP, the local economic development increases by $1.5. So while yes, it does support our people and it supports us in our time of need, it also supports the economy and anything that we build forward. Happy to take any questions on any of these titles at any point. This leads me to another conversation. So the Farm Bill is the largest piece of legislation, and there's been a lot of bills that have been drafted up in the precursor to the Farm Bill and into the drafting for the Senate and the House. And these marker bills, the intention is that we can put them in the Farm Bill and that the relative cost of these bills as a standalone bill might be harder to push. But since we're trying to push it in the Farm Bill, which is such a large piece of legislation, it might be a better forum to get some of these standalone bills to pass. One of the standalone bills that we're supporting is two bills is the Puerto Rico Nutrition Fairness Act and the Closing the Meal Gap Act. The Puerto Rico Nutrition Fairness Act was introduced by Delegate González Colón from Puerto Rico, and she's in the Republican House, and that has a co-sponsored by the Senate. And then another bill, the Closing the Meal Gap Act, was introduced by Alma Adams, and it also has a companion bill in the Senate. The particularities of Puerto Rico It's an archipelago that is critically food insecure, and the 41% of the population falls under the poverty line, the federal poverty line. Puerto Rico is currently under a NAP block grant, which is basically a capped version of SNAP. Puerto Rico gets around $2.85 billion in funding every year if there's no increases due to COVID or any other natural disaster. And what that means is that everyone who's subscribed in the program receives an amount of benefits. If there's any sort of disaster, if there's any sort of change in people's jobs, if there's something that happens that they can't afford to eat, and they need to, and more people need to subscribe to the program, everyone across the program receives less benefits. That's, I think pretty bad, especially when when this is the program that's supposed to support people in their time of need. To have their benefits reduced just doesn't make sense. SNAP, which is a program in the United States, it's responsive to people's need. A little bit on the context of why we're on a block grant versus SNAP. Sometime around 1981, from 1979 to 1981, Puerto Rico was actually in the SNAP program, but was given a block grant program by Republicans in order to try to cut spending across the board. So ever since that, in 1981, Puerto Rico has been on this block grant. Some other particularities of the block grant are, since it's a block grant, any additional increase in funding has to be legislated for. So there's a few things there, but one thing I want to highlight is the emergency and disaster relief component that is in SNAP but not in NAP. SNAP has something called DSNAP, which is disaster SNAP, that can be approved by governors and by state agencies rather than through legislation, and is a much faster and more efficient process for allowing nutritional aid in times of need. So, for example, a USVI after Hurricane Maria received food aid in around nutritional food aid in 3 weeks, while Puerto Rico had to legislate for and advocate for 6 months to Congress in order to get any funding. So that was 6 months that Puerto Ricans weren't able to receive the benefits that they needed. Some of the other, and then here I include, in the actual slide, I include some of the people and portions of Puerto Rican population that are actually in the program. Oftentimes people believe that these are people who aren't working, it's people who don't want to work. But as you can see here, 28% of the population are older adults, 22% of the population that receive NAP benefit are children. There's 16% who are able-bodied individuals. These are people who want to work. It's not people who want to be on the program. Anyone who wants to be on a nutritional assistance program, they're not going to get enough to survive. So this is not something that there's a very large false narrative when it comes to who is receiving these benefits, and I'd like to show here that it's not really true. These are people who are working, they're people who are trying to improve their livelihood, and we just want to help support them however we can. Here, and this is another portion I wanted to highlight. It's a little complicated to see, but here in the left side of all these charts, you can see Puerto Rican benefits under this program versus other territories and states of benefits under the program. Hawaii, which is a very similar situation to Puerto Rico, you can see that like stark differences between the benefits. Even in the USVI, you can see some of the benefits between NAP beneficiaries and SNAP beneficiaries. Across the board, Puerto Ricans in NAP receive around 41% less in benefits as of 2021. And this doesn't make sense to me because Puerto Rico is one of the territories or states with the highest index of food. This has to do with the Jones Act, has to do with the Foraker Act, which places their national security acts that place some restrictions on trade for Puerto Rico that end up increasing the cost of food, on top of the fact that 80 to 85% of our food is imported, which means that we're already spending more on food. Yes, and I think one of the last things that I like to highlight as well in NAP and not in SNAP is that it doesn't give us access to a lot of the a lot of the programs that are currently on SNAP and a lot of the local procurement options as well. For example, Online SNAP, which is a pilot program that's being run in a lot of the states to support rural communities and older adults who might not be able to, or people who might just not be able to get to the supermarket for any reason, is not available in Puerto Rico. Some other local procurement options that are available through SNAP aren't available in Puerto Rico. Any legislation that we have to do for NAP has to be a standalone issue. So anytime that advocates for SNAP in the US and Bread for the World, when we advocate for SNAP, Puerto Rico is not included in that conversation. So it's just a little tiring to see, that US citizens get excluded and get different treatment, and just to see this inequity persist is just something I want to help change. So I can stop here on the academic side. I'm happy to give a little bit of the how Congress has been responding to some of these NAP to SNAP transitions for Puerto Rico. But I'll wait to hear more questions.
Before you do that, let's answer Lisa's question about the highest index for food. Say a little bit about what that means.
Yes, so that means that Puerto Ricans pay more for food on average than other populations. I didn't include the statistic here, but happy to share one with Lisa, and she can share it with you all. I believe Puerto Rico is, I believe it's the third highest state in terms of food prices, and I think it comes after Hawaii and Alaska. But I'll be sure to confirm that. The main reason for why we have higher food costs is because we have to pay for extra shipping costs, and everything we buy is imported, rather than, so that extra transportation cost just is what really increases the food price index for Puerto Ricans across the board. Don't know if that answers that question.
It does, it absolutely does. And before you continue, Jose, this typically is a good time to open up for questions. And so if we can almost pause a moment, still come back to the congressional piece and some of the policy pieces that you want to offer. But may I invite you to stop sharing the presentation, and then we'll come back to the full community and then come back to the presentation, if that's okay. So we'll facilitate the ability for everyone to come on screen for a moment. So based on what you've heard or other questions, and Kerwin, do you have anything initially that you either want to ask or offer?
Yes, I'd like to. So I've heard about the Jones Act. So we were down there last week, and which stipulates that only American-bound vessels, Puerto Rico has to get there. What would be a possible solution or workaround to that? And do you have a sense of what the difference in the cost would be if that were removed, if that barrier were removed?
As to a workaround, the workarounds that a lot of Puerto Ricans are seeing is to increase local agriculture, so that they can, promote their own local food baskets. If some of you might have heard, we have a lot of local root vegetables that got replaced by potatoes, and because it was a cheaper commodity, and for a lot of different reasons. So local agriculture is really the way to do the workaround, rather than going through legislation to change the Jones and Foraker Acts. In terms of the impact on food, happy to share a study as well with Lisa, done by the local state legislature around how the Jones and Foraker Acts impact not only the price of food, but the price of all goods that come to Puerto Rico. I believe it's an additional tax of somewhere from 16 cents on the dollar for some food commodities, which is, I think, pretty high. But
okay, so Ivan's asking a question there, Kerwin, that you can capture. Can we come in from Puerto Rico to and even, as you mentioned, Hawaii and Alaska also? I'm considerate of the community we have gathered here, rural, urban, and you touched on the rural demographics, being very high. And Jose or Marco, but Jose, even as you're working from Maine to Maryland, Jose, what are some of the what are some of your intentions, even as you're convening those different groups in different locations?
I want to start by saying that the thing that Jose highlighted about the cost of food in Puerto Rico also applies to some communities, especially rural communities in the US, either because it impacts the cost of food or because it impacts the availability of nutritious food. A friend of mine once did a study in Massachusetts, one of your states, Jose, and they looked at neighborhoods where the difference between getting higher calories or a greater amount of calories for the average individual versus the cost of getting nutritious calories for that individual. And it was at least 10% more consistently in the places where they tested. So it costs more to eat well than it does to eat. And that oftentimes has its own side effects. So thinking through nutrition as well as availability of food access through the SNAP program is really important. So one of the other pieces that we're looking at is called the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Innovation Investment Program. So the GUSNIP for short means that in places where there is availability of the GUSNIP program, individuals can go to a farmer's market and buy twice the value of produce that they can ordinarily get through SNAP. So they can take their SNAP dollar and get twice the value. That improves both access to food and good nutrition. So that really is helpful, I think, in a lot of communities around the country, especially those that may not have access to larger stores. If they can go to more community places and it's easier for them to participate, more folks will be able to benefit from that. And there's a number of policies within the Farm Bill that are really meant to target communities that otherwise don't have good access to food on a consistent basis. Does that help a little bit, or?
So could you guys respond to Ivan's question? So when you say imported, do you mean inside the US or outside the US?
So I was just typing up a response. I'll just read it. So all goods imported to Puerto Rico have to go through continental US flagged vessels. But we import 70% of our food and more through the United States and the rest from international providers. Still, everything that gets imported usually goes to Jacksonville, Florida before it comes to Puerto Rico, even if it's coming from a domestic US partner. I don't know if that answered the question.
Ivan, you're welcome to come off mute and clarify if there's anything additional.
No, he answered the question, but it just seems like to have food imported from our own country to one of our own states or territories this seems, I don't totally understand that, but okay. Now he answered the question.
Are there any other members of the community that has questions that they would like to offer at this point?
Yes, hi, I'm Rodney. Serve as pastor and executive director of Baptist Student Foundation at Purdue. So it's a two-part question, I guess. One is the Farm Bill and what's budgeted there. How is it that we pay so much, we budget for so much money, yet have 12 million children experiencing food insecurity? How is it that we budget so much money, yet we're not making it doesn't seem like we're making significant change in people's lives? Was my first part of the question. And secondly, so in where I serve on Purdue campus, a Big Ten school, we have a food pantry here. 40% to 45% of students at this Big Ten school is experiencing food insecurity.
Yeah.
We're serving about 100 150 families a week through our food pantry, right? And food insecurity is not just about, like you said, not just about folks that are not eating, but healthy foods is crucial in this, right? And so, you know, I don't know how to do it yet, but my goal is to put the food pantry out of business. But that will mean no student is food insecure. I have no clue how to do that yet. But I mean, and a lot of this is tied also to a living wage, right? It all ties in. So if we're not fighting, I talk to pastors about this sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, you want tithes and offering every Sunday, but are you out there fighting for the same congregants you're begging for tithes and offering that they get, that you're making sure that, are you fighting for them to have a living wage as well? Because that'll help, that'll help the tithes and offering also, right? So that's I don't know if I'm clear on my question, but if you can kind of help me with my wrestling, my struggles with this, and the amount of money that's being poured into it, and what's the solutions to like really helping people not need food pantries, right? I know it's a complex question, but I don't know. We can get something out of that. Thank you.
Jose, do you want to start? Because I've got a closing for this one.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, so Jim Baird, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I believe is in Indiana's 4th district, and he's on the Committee of Agriculture, and he's the chairman of a subcommittee on conservation research and biotechnology, subcommittee on livestock, dairy, and poultry. So very critical district that you're a part of. So bringing a lot of these concerns to his table is you know, critical. I think it's a very good time because of the Farm Bill. As to your initial question of why the Farm Bill, yes, there's a lot of money, but a lot of it doesn't go to the places that it should. That's a question around equity. It's a question that we know, we're very aware. There's a lot of populations that don't have access to SNAP, right? I just mentioned Puerto Rico, but there's also a drug there's the ex-incarcerated individuals have a ban for 5 years, and they're one of the populations that needs to support the most, right? There's also some bans on Native American individuals, and there's also bans on college students on SNAP, right? They have to work 20 hours. So there's a lot of barriers and bans in place, and a lot of issues with work requirements that really does prohibit a lot of populations to access these benefits as they could. You know, a number I've seen a lot is that SNAP average benefits are $6-7 a day. And I think I've heard Jim McGovern quote this as well. And that's nothing, right? I think that's barely a meal. If you think about it like that. So there's, not to get too political, but there's also some you know, private interest groups that make sure that SNAP is only for groceries. It's not for fresh meals as well. It's something that could also help to, you know, maybe tailor some of that direct food insecurity that some populations might face. So my answer to the question is it's cheating a little bit, but it means we have a lot of work to do. We have to make sure that we highlight these priorities for our communities directly to our members of Congress, and to make sure that you know, we can get change done. There's private interest groups that are fighting against a lot of these things, but you know, I think that this is more than a moral prerogative. It's just a common decency. It's just something that we should all be working towards, ending hunger. So I'll let and happy to, if I didn't answer the question, evaded it, happy to follow up, but I'll let Marco.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to transition to what I wanted to say, which was, I think there's a lot of people who want to define what it means to deserve help. The deserving poor, if you will, people who we can feel sorry for and therefore want to help. And that seems like a shame. Just from a biblical standpoint, you know, I will confess, I don't, you know, I'm Presbyterian, not a Baptist. I suspect if we sat and talked long enough, we would find dozens of ways in which Presbyterians and Baptists disagree. But if you look for how many times Jesus teaches us to feed one another, to care for one another, to show love for one another through the ways in which we provide food and clothing and help, that we don't disagree on. So to me, that's the moral and biblical imperative for especially us who took on this responsibility to be part of God's realm here. We will pray about what comes next. Here's the good news, if you will, to pardon the pun. The good news is that over the years, we have learned that some programs work well. One of those has been the SNAP program. Getting money, resources in the hands of people who need it, specifically to buy food, has been a very effective tool. Another of those has been the school meals program. We saw the impact of that when the pandemic hit, and children who were getting food in schools no longer had access to food. And we did a very smart thing. We gave them EBT cards. We made those available through states to make sure that the family had the extra resources per kid. Sometimes, I think on the bottom end it was $250 per child, on the higher end it was $450 per child. But we got food into their hands. We cut the number of children experiencing hunger by 40%. So it's not everything, but we know what works. And the question is whether we will do, as my boss used to say, whether we have the political will to do the thing we know needs to be done. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. So if you want to continue with your presentation.
I'd like to say something. Hi, this is Sandy Velez. Thank you for
Sandy.
all the information you're providing. I'm a mainland Puerto Rican, and I grew up on a block of cheese in New York City when we would get our little boxes of food. I'm 69, and the question that Pastor Lynch, brought up is how are we still in this situation, which to me seems like it's just gotten worse rather than better. And then you see all these trillions of dollars you're talking about. It's a little mind-boggling. But it's something that I've almost given up on, because you hear things like the government paying farmers not to farm.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, really? Like farmers that are rich, millionaires, not to farm. Interesting. And then I just heard today, I'd like to know if you know anything about this on the news, that farmers are using artificial intelligence for their crops because of the cost of to farm and so forth. So is that something that's also going on in Puerto Rico, or is that like a worldwide thing they're doing with looking at artificial intelligence to cut down on the cost? And I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in on this one. The answer to the Puerto Rico part, no. AI is not being, and AI and robots and a lot of other tools that could be used for farming are not being used in Puerto Rico. In terms of AI in general being used in farming, I do have a few different colleagues who work a little bit more on this space, but there have been advancements in drone technology to just see different crops and how they're being affected from a macro scale. Think about like massive farms that have acreage larger than Puerto Rico, right? So there's been some advancements on that. There's been some advancements on rock clearing. So a lot of farmers, they have to clear rocks from their farms, and it's a very big issue. I don't know if any of you have ever worked in a farm, but that's also something that's being worked on in terms of AI and just robotic implementation. And then there's also been some increased seeding. So what that means is that there's a tractor that plows and then also does some of the seeding. All those are things that are being done by major agricultural producers in the United States. This is technology that's very expensive and is a little prohibitive for smaller agricultural producers to access, which is a very large issue. And then to hopscotch on this question and the prior question, one of the biggest issues that rural and smaller producers have, and just rural populations, is that they sometimes don't have access to the funds that they don't have access or don't know that there are funds available to them. In Puerto Rico in particular, there was request for funding for $7 million to support the territories, and the Puerto Rico didn't even apply for it. It was supposed to be to support local farms, to support local procurement, but they didn't have, they weren't aware of it. But also in some communities in Puerto Rico, they don't have the capacity to manage these federal grants that are very complicated. So working on addressing some of those capacity issues for local nonprofits and local governments, it's also something that's very important, and finding technical assistance so they can access these different technologies. Marco does a little bit more work and knows a little bit more about the H-2A visa and immigrant farm worker issue as well, but I'll leave this question here.
Sure, I'll be very brief. Just H-2A visas are an agricultural visa, and there's been a real push to try and make sure that, along with farmers who need more agricultural workers and they want them to come in from other countries to serve that role, that there be some equity in that work, and that could potentially be constructed in a way that allows a path to citizenship over time for the persons who come in under an H-2A visa. That is challenging to do. It might make sense that farm workers ought to be included in the farm bill, but the farm worker policies related to visas and immigration all come through other committees, in particular the Homeland Security Committee. And so it's a separate set of governance. It's not impossible. There is a dialogue going on there in some cases. It's just challenging to fit one thing into the other because it's seen more as an international policy and a national security policy.
Thanks. Dr. Debbie, do you have any questions or contributions you'd like to add before we turn it back over to our presenters to go to their slides?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention and ask. So I am a pastor of a deaf congregation. I'm a member of the deaf community. I'm hard of hearing. American Sign Language is my first language. And I also am founder and director of an organization called Deaf International. And I work with deaf refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers. And so I wanted to put that out there, although I know everyone thinks about that, but also to be disabled and be a refugee and an immigrant and an asylum seeker, and the atrocities of food insecurities are just, it's like, you know, the one person mentioned like Rodney, you know, like what? And here in the US, you know, and so if anybody has any statistics, I would love if you had time to share them, you know, send it to my email or whatnot, on not just people in the US with disabilities. There's issues with food insecurities terribly, and you had a little bit of that, Jose, but to be deaf or disabled in any way and be a refugee or an immigrant or asylum seeker is just a whole other atrocity that it's like, you know, we're just stuck in this hamster wheel trying to make sure they have food each day, each week, each month. So if anybody has information on that, I would love that.
Debbie, I put my email into the chat. Jose's email is there as well. I'd like to invite you to send me a note because I'd like to follow up with you. I don't have specific information off the top of my tongue, but here's what we've done before, probably a couple of years ago. What we've learned is that there are persons who come at great risk when they leave their country. And in that process of arriving to the US border and seeking asylum have sometimes become disabled. It's a horrible story. I don't want to go into it now. It happens more often than you realize. And the sad part is that when they arrive at the US, they're sent back. They're repatriated to their home country, where they are no longer able to earn a living, or will struggle all the more in trying to provide food for themselves. So there's been some documentation of that. And if you send me a note, I'll try and seek that out and see if we can find something that would be helpful to what you're talking about. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. So if I may, let me call an audible really quick. We may not be able to get to the slides, but if you guys could share them with us, we can get them to the group. Jaime, you put a comment in the chat. Would you like to lift that up, please? And then Andre, I see you next.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. It's a great input for me. Iglesia Bautista Bethesda have like around 200 people, like 75%, 75 children. Most of our community are illegal, undocumented. They don't have a legal status here. So they don't qualify for any government program. So the church is doing a lot to help this community. What I found months ago, when I visit those families, I see something that is hard in my heart, pain in my heart when I see them eating Maruchan soup as a dinner. And that breaks my heart. I cry because, when I arrived to the United States a long time ago, I eat those soups, even with my children, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the money to buy something else. So what I did is I made a program in that church, stay away from Maruchan soup, but even those will help you a little bit, not to go with hungry into bed. So our church collect some money to buy eggs, chickens, the main tortillas, corn, frijoles, beans, for them to do a decent meal, I have 3 families right now that we are helping them from Honduras. A single mother with 3 girls, teenagers, beautiful girls, eating Maruchan soup. Because they don't have money. Another single mother with 5 children. They came from Honduras. They are here in our community. They come to my church. We provide in our Sunday school some meal for those children because they come to our church without eating, without having a breakfast. So my wife decided to buy something, a little portion of food for them. But we have a struggle here with, let me tell you that 90% of my membership are illegal immigrants. Most of them work in construction. When it's raining or when it's snow, they don't work. So they come to me, say, but we don't have money to buy food, and I never say no. I never say I can help you. That's not my heart. I say, let me see what can I do. At least we give you $50 to go to Walmart to buy something, or we provide a little basket, the decent, regular, a small basket, eggs, corn, onions, beans, whatever, for them to eat. So my question is, I know that in this kind of situation, the church has to lift these families up and help those families, otherwise the church, the purpose of the church is not there, you don't help your community. So, but we don't have the resources. We don't have the money.
I want to offer one thing for you because you raised an important point, and that is that many of them have children. And what I encourage you to think a little bit about is that those children, if they were born in the United States, are United States citizens, and as a consequence, benefit from those programs that are available to them. The sad part is that many people feel they're not safe if they go and apply for those programs. So sometimes the church can help by learning how those program applications work, supporting someone and making sure that, I know that there are people who have used the church address to apply for the resources that that child might need. So at least that family gets the help that that US citizen child is entitled to. It does help sometimes. It's not everything and it's not enough. So God bless you for the work that you are doing. Bread for the World does believe that migration is a hunger issue. I say, we see it, immigration as in who comes to the US border, but migration globally is absolutely a hunger issue. So thank you for that.
I'm just a quick comment. I think if not in August, definitely in September, we're going to work to facilitate a conversation to help churches understand the opportunities to do just what you're describing. Many of our church leaders do not understand that there are ways to legally support, intervene, be a mediator. There are many of our churches, our community ministries. We have some represented on this call who assist people where English is their second language to complete the forms. So that's a helpful consideration, but you're raising a level of urgency and an opportunity for ABHMS to convene people to help them understand the opportunity to help in these situations. So let's look, we'll look to see what we can facilitate sooner than later.
Lisa, I know that we're short on time. I dropped something in the chat that I'll call your attention to, and I added my email address there. What these are in July, we will host a series of conversations for targeted states. So if you look at that list and you see that your state is there, you can reach out to me and I'll connect you with the person that's leading that project, right? What we're doing is every time we get together, about 4 times a year, is having a conversation about what our role is and what we can do to make a difference in moving Congress around legislation that helps hungry people. You'll meet other activists. Some of them are pastors, some of them are lay people, some of them are just volunteers that care a lot. And so, Jose, why don't you talk about what you're going to do at your event? Yours is July 13th.
Yeah. So during my quarterly meeting, this one's going to be a little special since it's right after our advocacy summit. So we're going to break up into a state-based delegations. There's state teams and leaders for each of the states. They're going to talk about some of their experience in an advocacy summit. Then they're going to discuss some of their some of the in-district actions together with members of Congress. So it's a little bit more on the advocacy side of the chain. But we also talk about some of the legislative updates that are coming up that we might not have had a chance today to discuss. And just to see how we can engage, 1, our communities, 2, our members of Congress, and 3, the beneficiaries that we're trying to support in order to move any legislation forward. I will share, I believe Lisa will probably follow up since she mentioned it, but the USDA Faith Engagement Office has a great community organizer that works with different organizations to try to find what funding supports their particular initiatives and their particular churches. So
real quick, I didn't tell you what Bread for the World members do sometimes. What I think is really cool, and maybe some of you, has anyone heard of an offering of letters? An offering of letters. So here's what it is. We think that writing a letter to your member of Congress can make a difference. And we invite you to learn about the topic, in this case, the Farm Bill, during an adult study, perhaps before or after church, but create a space where you can learn about that, and you can find those resources at our website. That's bread.org. So you find those resources, you work on that little packet, and you teach a class. Maybe you've got 8, 10 people. I don't know, maybe you have more. But if you do this, you can invite people to take home the sample letter, write a letter at home and bring it back. And what I like about it is that at my church, we do it in the service. We invite people to literally put the letter they wrote into the offering plate so that when it goes forward, we can offer a blessing over that letter, and it carries forward not only our political concerns, but also our prayers for people experiencing hunger. So there are resources for the offering of letters. Anyone on that list that I posted there, Jose or myself, are happy to help you. If you ever wanted to do letter writing at church, let us know. We'd love to talk with you about that.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Jose. We're gonna get close to wrapping up. There are 2 more questions. I want to invite Ashley, Reverend Ashley, if you have a question or comment, please unmute yourself and share, and then we'll go to Dr. Clifford Johnson.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I might have missed something because my internet just failed and came back. So I did hear something about the letter writing with Bread for the World. I just want to say thank you to the folks from Bread for the World, because it's been an organization that's been really inspirational to me for probably since I was in seminary, which is a really, really long time ago now. But I really have appreciated the work you've done, and it's kind of moved me along this path. I think I just want to say, I think I just want to raise a question about one of our issues that we have. We're running a food pantry, but also we're working with other partners doing food rescue. We had a food program that kind of expanded exponentially when COVID hit. And one of the biggest issues we've had is around just distribution. I mean, and also just funding. Lately, after the COVID money dried up, there's just very, very little in terms of finding grants. And I'm guessing other people here may have the same experience in terms of like running this kind of work and program. So I guess in distribution, we try to get things out to folks who, many of whom can't leave their homes. And we're trying to get out produce and healthy things. And so I guess I just wonder if you have any comments about, or any other folks on the call here who would have any kind of comments about issues around distribution. We got hooked into the DoorDash mess. If any of you know what I'm talking about, DoorDash sucked everybody in and then recanted. And so did a lot, but now, it's just made it harder for us in terms of the delivery that we were trying to do, because we're trying to do with all volunteers. So anyway, thank you.
Marco, was there something you wanted to offer? Just noted you were off mute, or okay, or Jose.
No, I've heard that in other contexts, Ashley, and I know that there are other states where people were testing out alternative methods for delivery of food. And I think that was important, especially to rural communities. I know people in Texas were testing that out. I'll be interested to see whether or not there's an analysis of places where we did try innovative ways. I'm trying to remember whether they were working with Walmart or Amazon in Texas, but they were trying to deliver packets of food in especially rural communities, places where there isn't regular public transportation or other ways to get around.
I'll offer this, and then Dr. Johnson, invite you. Here in Asbury Park, there's what people are calling a food desert or food apartheid, depending on the language that you want to use. And one of the things that we found was that there are 10 or 12 food pantries. Some run out of churches, some run out of community organizations. And what one of my colleagues sort of kind of came in and organized the food pantries that weren't collaborating, they weren't talking with each other. And so they they set up different distribution points. And so each day, there's someone that goes to a farm to get fresh fruits and veggies, bring them back, and then they'll distribute them to the different places. And so the people in the community know that you can go to this local church that's, a couple of blocks from you, or if you're over this side, this part. So one of those things is trying to organize and find efficiencies with the food pantries, and seeing if there is county or statewide funding for fresh food or produce, like farm to table type things. Like those are the ways that this organization has tried to address that need of distribution and funding by trying to partner up and figure out how the community and the county could get in on it.
Yeah, that's really important to share. And I think, I have some experience in Texas, and partly through the Baylor program on hunger and food security, as well as the Texas, there's a statewide network where they set out probably about 7 years ago to really work with local elected officials. These are school board members and city council people, to understand what hunger looks like locally, and then invite them to draw down resources from the state. So things like what you just said, that's a coordinating function that local cities and municipalities ought to be able to help with. And wouldn't that be great? That they add to those resources. I think when those things come together, it's really important. The other thing I'll mention in this category of what more can we do that maybe is a little bit out of the ordinary or is new, and that is we heard at our most recent advocacy summit, actually a friend of mine, someone I've known for quite a while, pastor, Pleasant Hope Baptist Church was his church in Baltimore, Maryland, Reverend Dr. Heber Brown, who now leads the Black Church Food Security Network. So if you've not heard of him, look him up, please do. What he's trying to do is create new pathways for food systems that reach particularly African-American communities, but the lessons that are learned there and that are being shared are important to all of us, and they're worth paying attention to. They are finding people, churches who have property, who are now planting that extra acre off the side of the church, right? Or working collaboratively with food rescue organizations, and then thinking about local businesses and how does this create jobs even in some neighborhoods in some parts of the country. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Marco. Dr. Johnson.
First, let me say thank you, Marco and Jose, for your presentation. Both of them have been most informative. My question may take some time for a response, maybe not, and maybe it will be taken up when Lisa brings the next presentation. But I know we're talking about the government involved in dealing with food insecurity. But is there any data that will tell us the impact of private industry on this matter, what impact it has, and what impact it should have? And also my question is there any data or information that shows where private industry has walked alongside this in food security in terms of being an advocate?
So it is a tough question. Feeding America, which is one of the largest nonprofits in the US, has around $4 billion in funding every year. I believe and I might be misquoting, but I believe over 70% of its budget comes from non-corporate partners, so government, and then the rest of it comes from corporate partners and donations. In terms of what the private sector does in terms of food security, I think one of the largest things that the private sector has done so far has been the donations that they do to food banks and some of the food recovery efforts. In terms of the impact that has had, I don't have it at the moment, but I'm sure that someone in the Policy Research and Institute in Bread for the World does have that, and happy to follow up with that information. What I do know is that food waste is one of the largest contributors to climate change, and it is something that a lot of corporate interests are very pro-supporting because it is, a tax write-off for them. Any additional role that the private sector may have is really does need to be directed by policy. The GUSNIP incentive, the GUSNIP Schumacher incentive program, it's a great example of how the private sector can support some of these nutritional incentives. There's one of the programs through the GUSNIP is called the Produce Incentive Grant, where there is a match component from the private sector in order to get this program started. What the program actually is depends state by state, and it depends on each of the different organizations that apply and receive the funding. But usually the program that results is something called Double Up's Food Bucks program. So it's something where communities can use their EBT cards to purchase. They get extra money to purchase produce. On top of any other thing that they purchase with their EBT cards that's qualified. So that's an example. But we really do have to work on championing ways to include the private sector without, outright just excluding them. So it does need to be a concerted effort from the nonprofit sector and from the government sector to make sure we find ways to do that.
Thank you.
All right. We are near the time that's been allotted for this dialogue. I want to offer Marco and Jose a final question, just like moonshot here. I just looked, and the defense budget for the last 5 years has been 300 to 400 billion each year. And we're talking 200 or 300 million for food. Outside of what we know and see as the norm and what we believe can happen, if no was not an option, what would you encourage us as faith leaders, as community organization leaders? How can we change the trajectory of food insecurity, knowing that there is enough resource, enough food, enough land? What should we be doing if we could think outside the box?
Okay, I don't know the answer to that. Let me be as honest as possible. I don't know the answer to that. I continue to be really impressed by people who are thinking about their communities and building out, trying to understand what's that function of food system that applies to the people that I relate to. How do we relate to the next group of people, and so on, so forth. Because I think that has a lot of integrity. And so if there's going to be innovation, it's going to be relevant to the communities that you serve, and relevant to the people that you know are directly impacted and frankly in relationship with them. That's the best advice I can offer you, because you're right, the powers and principalities are great, and we don't overcome them by ourselves. It's only when we come together that we can have a voice that's going to be heard. Jose?
Yeah, I think the word that just comes out to me is engagement. I didn't share my origin story, but I started a food bank and basically a food distribution service in Puerto Rico, and I had no idea what I was doing, how I was going to start. But I was together with members of my community. I was there with them. I helped them, get food. I did everything I could to knock down doors on government offices to try to get funding. And I worked with the community to hear them, to understand what they needed. So I think that any solution that can support your community is going to come from engaging with your members, be it any form of advocacy, be it any form of food distribution, be it any form of government assistance, nutritional aid program, any sort of agricultural subsidy, any sort of technical assistance. So finding ways to engage with your communities, and maybe having roundtables around some of these issues, and just starting to highlight some of these priorities before you do any actions and start outlining plans. I think that's very helpful. As to solution, how to end hunger from now till December, I think really advocacy is really important in this next stretch. But past the Farm Bill, right? We also need to keep being there for our communities. So don't know if that answered it. But.
No, that's I appreciate the honest, forthright approach. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Jose, and thank you all for being in attendance. Please, if you will, take a moment to scroll through the chat. I know Marco and Jose dropped some good information, some emails, some different things in there. If you want to capture that before we conclude the meeting for follow-up, I know they left their email addresses there also in case something comes to you after we've dismissed. And if you missed their email address, you could email Lisa or myself, and we will try to make the proper connections. This conversation has been rich. It's troubling and challenging to think about 40 million people, 12 million children going hungry. And it won't change unless people who are engaged and advocating do that. Thank you again to our presenters. Thank you for Bread for the World. Check out their website. There's a report that from 2022 that they have on the website that talks about their impact and the effect. And we encourage you to stay engaged with us as we at American Baptist Home Missions. We're looking for ways to help elevate the work of people in the communities that are doing the work. And we want to come alongside those who are doing this important work. And so I want to offer a closing prayer, and we definitely want you to look forward to our next Justice Dialogue, which comes in October. And we'll send email information out about that, about the title and the topic closer to that date. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you for bringing us together today. We thank you for our presenters and our facilitators, Lord, and the conversation that was rich in empathy and concern and love. God, for Marco and Jose, Bread for the World staff, volunteers, those who are doing the work on the ground, we pray that you continue to strengthen them, that you give them the fire and the passion to continue the work. that you help the conversations that they have with legislators, that they have with community members, and bless their hands as they become your hands and feet in the world. Lord, for all of those who are gathered and concerned about this issue, we pray that you would open our eyes and our ears so that we can hear the cries of your people. Open our eyes to the ways that you are calling us to serve you in this season. Help us, God, to be all of those things that you have created us to be. We thank you for American Baptist Home Missions. We thank you for Bread of the World. We thank you for all of the collective body that is gathered. And we pray that as we dismiss from this place, but never your presence, that you go before us and go with us, that you lead us, guide us, and keep us until you bring us together again. And that the work that you have commissioned, that you have started, this good work in us, that you will see it through until the day Jesus Christ returns. These and many blessings we ask, and by faith we declare them done. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone, for your attention and your presence. We look forward to continuing to engage with you in the future. Blessings on the rest of your day, and we'll see you later.
And to
Thank
you,
you.
bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Should I stay on or?
We can stop recording.